report. Thank you, George. So our agenda for today, thanks for checking in, everyone who checked in. And then the UN Decade Reparations Tour Report, which I will give in 5 minutes or less. And then we'll hear from each of you on your city and state updates on what's happening with reparations. And then we'll talk about the WILF International Secretariat resolution that was passed in 2022 and what our obligations are as sections. And then we need to choose a regular meeting date and time. This is the first Thursday of the month, which I'm okay with doing if everybody else is. And then we'll have other comments. I think we'll have time for that before our hard stop at 3. And Robin has already indicated that she has an agenda item to add. So anyone else who has something to add outside of the listed agenda items will be able to do so under other. So on the UN Decade Reparations Tour Report, it was sponsored by Southern Anti-Racism Network in terms of who paid for it. And it was an idea for me to travel to several cities in the Northeast with a call for reparations and to acknowledge the UN Decade, which began in January of 2015 and will end in December of 2024. And it calls for recognition, justice, and development for people of African descent worldwide. And it's just amazing to me that so few people have heard that we're in the UN Decade, and we've been in the UN Decade for over 8 years now. And so we first stopped was DC, which we connected with the DMV branch. It was a meeting of 10 people. Then we went on to Philadelphia, which was the largest meeting on the tour, 20 people. The Philadelphia branch turned out big with its individual members, as well as bringing in quite a few different organizations from around Philly, including a very dynamic presentation from the NCOBRA branch in Philadelphia, which is a really strong NCOBRA branch. And they talked about what they were doing in terms of the ordinance in Philadelphia. So that was very important. Then we went on to New York, where we met with the Unified Black Caucus and Brooklyn for Peace. And that was very good. A meeting of 8 in the pouring down rain, but very supportive in terms of reparations. And then we went from New York to Providence, where I spent about 4 days talking to people in order to build the Rhode Island branch. So I'm looking forward to that happening in October. And then the going on Zoom with Robin Lloyd and that wonderful gathering in Rochester, Vermont, which I'm looking to maybe join in person next year. But that was nice to be able to talk to WILF members, and they recruited a new member at that gathering. So that was nice to hear someone's husband join WILF. She was already a member. And then from Rochester, Vermont, on to Boston, which was the final stop on August 15th, where Cole Harrison of Massachusetts Peace Action had organized a nice little gathering of 15 people. And one of my young mentees surprised me, and she was there. And she was acting like such a sweet mentee, going around making sure everybody got signed in, taking good care of me, took me to Indian food afterwards and took me back to my hotel. So it was a very pleasant tour. And there will be a follow-up tour October 17th through the 23rd to really kind of focus in on No to NATO, which was another component of the tour. How can we mobilize people nationwide for the No to NATO 75th anniversary summit, which will be in DC in July of 2024. So this is part of the work of Global Women for Peace United Against NATO. And I'll just say quickly that SARN plans to support this effort as a partner in the Global Women United for Peace United Against NATO, Global Women for Peace United Against NATO. So we're planning to do a Southeast tour in March, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, New Orleans, and then a Midwest tour, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and Allen, and Milwaukee, and Madison, and Minneapolis, Midwest in May. And then the West Coast, we want to come in the fall to the West Coast, Joan and Philip, to do Portland, Seattle, maybe San Jose, but for sure the San Francisco Bay Area and possibly Los Angeles. And so that will be getting close to the end of the decade. So that's the report on the UN Decade Tour and the work and commitment of the Southern Anti-Racism Network to building branches of will, in addition to promoting the UN Decade and reparations. So are there any questions about the UN Decade?
Yes, what are we doing to commemorate the UN Decade, given that there's only 1 year and a few months left? And I'm especially wondering what we're doing with it in terms of the International Congress next summer.
Well, what we're doing is what I just described, making people aware. Now, the Wolf resolution that George and I arranged to get passed at the Triannual International Wolf Congress in July of 2022, that resolution is what every section is supposed to be doing. And what this subgroup or working group is doing is what the US section should be doing. So when we get to the 2025 WILF International Congress, we will be reporting on what the US section done by what the Fannie Lou Hamer branch, this subgroup has done. So what you're doing now for reparations and the work that you're doing associated with the work of this subgroup, Robin, this is going to be all a part of our report. So all the 52 sections around WILF are supposed to be doing what we're doing, working on reparations, working on things that I'm doing with the tour. So we're doing the work.
That's enough. That's one enough.
Tracy, mute yourself.
I'm so sorry.
Mute yourself, Tracy. I'll get back to you. But Regina
Okay.
has her hand up. So Regina, speak.
I read, I think in Pass Blue, that the UN is recommending, or some subgroup in the UN is recommending, that the decade be extended for another decade. So that's quite significant. And I think we could add that to, we could ask WILF to support that. send the appropriate communications, I guess, to the UN in support of that. I think I read that in Pass Blue this past week. And so I can't pinpoint the exact location, except that that's probably where I read it. But I thought that was quite significant that a recommendation had been made because enough progress has not been made during the first decade.
Well, Regina, that sounds just like something that could happen because initially it was a 1 year for the descendants of African African descent peoples, and then it was expanded into the decade. So it's not surprising to me that it would be extended because we haven't received the recognition, definitely not the justice, and definitely not the development in the 10 years. It's like in the first 8 years, nothing much happened. So Alan, please unmute yourself and speak. Take down your hand, Regina, please.
Yes. Relating to the same question, it seems a good idea that we should all support that this decade get extended. And in terms of where I see in our local area, this has at least put the question on the table with some initial formulation of what is a program, and then look to that, put that program in a timeline. So this the decade is to be extended until these high objectives are realized soon.
Well, why don't we, Alan, why don't we move into reports, and you can start reporting on the work you've been doing in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti around the reparations ordinance, because if you recall, all of us were asked to participate in getting reparations ordinances in our cities and states. That's what this group was charged with doing. So I'm working on it in Columbus, Georgia with the Fannie Lou Hamer branch. And I know that you've been working on it in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti. So we're ready for the city-state reports now. So you could go, and then Robin could go about what she knows about reparations ordinances in Vermont and in her area. So please go, Alan. Robin, Alan is speaking with his report, and then you could go after Alan.
I had a question about the UN decade that I wanted to ask.
Well, let's move the reports, and you can ask it as part of your report because we have a hard stop at 3. Go ahead, Alan. What's happening with Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor? If you have nothing to report, it's okay.
I have been in France for the summer, and I am just returned. I have put on the agenda, as it were, that we have an ordinance developed, and that we have a program scheduled for the conjunction of the UN Climate Ambition Summit on Wednesday, the 20th of September, joined on Thursday, the 21st, International Day of Peace, with these questions of particularly connecting land back and Native American sovereignties and reparations in African American development and restoration of justice.
Thank you, Alan. I know you've been away in France, so I'll catch up with you about this tour next year.
Well, the question I posed is, and what I have gotten, so what's going on in other cities? And I say, well, I know there's stuff in Asheville. I know they're working on this in Evanston, and California has come out with an amazing report. And
yes, Alan.
Alan. Is there a website, a link that connects what is going on in these various places? So when someone asks what is going on is there such a place I can tell somebody to go? That's my question.
Well,
Is it being developed? So I can say, well, if you want to go to this site, it'll tell you what's happening in Asheville, what's happening in Evanston, what's happening in Columbus, what's happening in California and San Francisco.
well, there's no such thing, Alan.
Seems like-
So
it
if we
seems
could
like
go
that
to
should be
Robin, oh, stop, Alan, mute yourself, please. Robin, what is your report?
Well, I think Alan didn't get a satisfactory answer to his question.
Well, this is not a Q&A thing, but I will deal with Alan offline. So, Robin, could we stick to the agenda, please, ma'am?
I have nothing to report.
Thank you. You said you had a question about the UN decade.
Yes, because I wondered whether any other sections are following through with the resolution that you and George passed at the International Congress, and are they doing anything? And if they are, there should be some way of bringing that all together at the Congress at the end of May this year, not wait for a year that did people do something or not, but let's celebrate what we should have. This group maybe should sponsor a webinar or something during the Congress on this thing next May. Is that
well, as you know, we have an administration in this section of WILF, in the U.S. section, where in organizing the UN Decade Reparations Tour, the president of this section caused a big stink about using the international WILF logo on the thing. So it is entirely up to the national board as to what can happen. And those of you who have been members of the US section for a long time, if you could cut through what I describe as the white supremacist behavior that occurs when people of African descent are trying to do something in this organization. So I'm perfectly willing to do something at the US section triennial, which is supposed to be in Minneapolis at the end of May. The whole idea of doing the tour is to end in Minneapolis right around the triennial. So I'm perfectly willing to report on it because I'm doing the work as a person of African descent, and people of European descent like you and Alan and Joan who want to be allies, and Regina, there are things you can do in your own states and branches. But, you know, it's not like it's too hard to figure that out, Robin. But the sections around the world in WILF, as best I can tell, nothing is happening in terms of the resolution that got passed, including in many of the sections in Africa, which I'm in conversation with Sylvia about, just to answer your question. When I look at the Italian section, the French section no longer exists, but the German section, I don't hear them talking about the UN decade. So the International Board report should come from Janet Slaughter, who is the regional rep. And if she can report on that, that would be great. But these are things that should be organized by the president and the national board of the US section. And I would say reach out to the president of the US section about how this gets reported. And we actually have 3 board members on the call. So perhaps they could say if there's been any mention of the UN decade at the board meetings, since the resolution was passed in 2022. So if we could go to California in terms of reports, because there's a lot of reparations activity in California. So Joan Goddard, Philip Cole, or Regina, do you know anything about reparations activity in California that you would like to report? Philip.
Well, our task force has ended their work, has sent the report to the legislature, which I believe is just now going back into session. Regina might know more about the beginning of the session. So we won't hear anything for a couple of months on the report that has been turned in.
Well, it has been extremely impressive what's going on in California. It's a model for what we can do in other states, possibly. Joan, did you have something to add?
Just that our, I guess, county, not official, but our countywide reparations group that is sponsored and organized by the African American Community Services Agency. It will be meeting this month, and that, as Philip said, and as you said, the wonderful, huge report, I think it's 500 pages or more, maybe, has come out. So there is a lot there about national information as well as California information. And if you haven't, if people have not seen it, it is available. The Office of the Attorney General of the state, OAG. Philip, do you have it? Or just Office of a search, Office of Attorney General, California, and then and reparations. And that, if that doesn't get you to it, contact Philip or Regina or me. My email address is easyjoan@rujo, rujo.org. Because, as I said, it got a lot of good things for California that need to be done, and suggestions and wonderful things, but it also has a lot that is nationwide. So it can serve as a resource for people. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that helps with Alan's question as well, because when you go to meetings of reparations activists, California is always lifted up as a model. So that's where a lot can be taken from California, in addition to Evanston, which people talk about a lot because they actually have a working ordinance that is already in place. Regina, please.
Let me take my hand down. I just wanted to say that the San Francisco report from the task force in San Francisco was completed on July 23rd. The task force continues to meet on the second Monday, so they'll meet on September 11th. Our mayor, upon receipt of the report, and with some of the recommendations having significant monetary cost to the city, has basically said she's not going to implement that. So there's sort of an impasse. And I haven't followed the local commission meetings after July to know what their response, or what kind of response they're making to that. But the mayor's budget process, our fiscal year starts July 1st. So this fiscal year, July 1st that we're in, there's really no money in the budget to implement any recommendations, as far as I know, for the local task force. As far as the state goes, the legislature is doing nothing with the report. There are no hearings scheduled or anything else, as far as I'm aware of. There's going to be a huge budget deficit probably in the state, unfortunately, because of taxes people are, the tax base is low, and we don't know what that's going to be. So even though there's been an excellent report in California, which you can read, and you can also listen to all the testimony from national witnesses which occurred in California. So all the efforts across the country will be using that testimony that's already available to you to look at. So I highly recommend just really spending some time reading the report, listening to testimony. And I wanted to ask if anybody is following the local city reparations ordinances. There's been a couple of conferences, and I know that there's one coming up that I got an email about and have discarded because I'm not going. But these are some of the local cities that have also already made reparations, and so those local municipalities are holding another national meeting, I think in October, and I can't recall the name of the group, so I can't look it up. I tried to, but I couldn't find it. But is anybody following, Kansas? Was it Kansas City? There's a number of places already, Ohio, that have already started doing reparations.
Well, I could speak to that. I could speak to that. There are a number of national reparations groups led by people of African descent that are operating pretty much in every state. And for instance, in Atlanta, there's a task force that's been put together and given $250,000 to come up with a plan. We know about the Evanston ordinance that passed a couple of years ago, the Buncombe County ordinance in North Carolina that passed a couple of years ago. Boston has passed an ordinance that they're trying to strengthen. So there are ordinances being passed around the country because the strategy is a bottom-up strategy. So we start at the local level, the state level, but it's all trying to get to that big thing that's been on the table since the late 80s called HR 40. It's been on the table in the US Congress since 1989 when John Conyers first introduced it. And it has not been able to, I don't care what year the Democrats have been in power, they have not moved the reparations, HR 40, and that is gonna hurt Biden in the upcoming election, and it's gonna hurt the Democrats because right now the demand is stronger than it's ever been. Reparations now. And so being a part of the movement led by people of African descent, there are lots of allies out there who are not working with people of African descent, which has been my message to Alan. Lots of Black folks up there in Ypsilanti and around in that area. You've got to be working with people of African descent to advance it and find out who the people are in the communities where things are going on, because trust me, they are there. And in large part, they're connected to NCOBRA. So in Georgia, Columbus, Georgia, it's gonna be a very slow going. The bicentennial for Columbus is 2028. So I'm working a 5-year plan so that by the time we get to the bicentennial, when the current mayor is gone and the potential of having a Black mayor who will take office in 2027, and that we can move the reparations piece, which the current mayor and city manager have already been alerted to it, and they know it's possible, but the political will inside of the current city council does not exist. So I'm working a 5-year strategy to change the composition of the city council, including the mayor, so that we can get to a vote on a real reparations ordinance with some teeth in it. Because in 2024, there are 4 seats on the council that are up. In 2026, there'll be an additional 5 seats that are up. And so, and the mayor's office. So by the time we get to 2028, the bicentennial, slavery, this is a slavery city formed in 1828. So when we get to 2028, the demand for reparations will be loud and clear. That's the strategy I'm working. It's not, and if the decade is extended, I say all power to the people, because we'll still be in the second decade when we do the reparations ordinance in Columbus. So I hope Regina is correct. Yes, Alan, speak.
Well, I'm challenged to say, okay, I will extend our view from 2024, which is our bicentennial, to resonate with 2028. We're barely able, and maybe this activity is going on in the African American community. My connections are not all that intimate. I'm also connected in the Palestine struggle, which makes me persona non grata in certain other circles. And so I'm a kind of a hot item. And so people know what I'm doing, and people are doing what they're doing. And I have a strategy on this next Earth Day, Peace Day thing to see if we can get in one place on the commons this conversation going on. And they may not be successful. And there's a lot of stuff in Ann Arbor politics. Ypsilanti is much more conscious. Native American questions are very resonant. And so land back and reparations is a clear juncture. And I think I mentioned the article about what's going on in Sierra Club. There's joining land back with reparations in the environmental movement seems a very positive development. So, but Ann Arbor is really backward. No one wants to touch this. The mayor doesn't want to touch this. And the African American community has relatively little. Maybe there's one person now on the city council who might begin to speak out. But this is not what I would have hoped for a once progressive town, which is very regressive. And maybe, so I'm doing what I can do, and I appreciate, and every connection I can make, I make, and I'm just back to personally into the situation. Yeah, but I like the notion.
Alan.
Yeah.
Alan, you know, my comrade, Peter Solenberger.
I've written to him, and he's given me no one to go talk to so-and-so, which anybody who would say I have an introduction to go talk to so-and-so, I would. I know pretty much the so-and-sos from the NAACP.
Well, you didn't let me finish my point. The tour that I'm planning for late May, with a stop in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti.
Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti. It's a good way to get Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti together. And so
not really. But I do know people in Ann Arbor, and because the university is there, and because Peter worked there, he might be able to identify, because the university is pretty much key to Ann Arbor. And so if you could find folks in the Black faculty of Ann Arbor, of the University of Michigan, that would be the route I would take. And so I will see who I can find, because I know lots of folks who work at the university. So I will try to work that route But we have a few months to work on it, so let's talk about it offline. But George, on the issue of the resolution, do you have it handy? The Wilf resolution that was passed.
Yeah, send that out.
I can find it. It won't take me long to find it.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, Tracy, could you unmute a new member of Wilf who is so dynamic? She's down in Charlotte, North Carolina. So Tracy, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Tracy Robbins. I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm looking forward to join you guys and do everything that I can do. Please forgive me. I was in my vehicle. My time kind of mixed with a class that I was taking, and my vehicle, for safety reasons, shut me down. So you guys are so important to me. I pulled over in a parking lot, and I'm sitting here, and I'm listening, and I'm here, and I'm present, and I will be going forward. Thank you all so much for accepting me, and it's good to meet you all.
Yeah, Tracy and I had a nice talk yesterday. And so Tracy is a real serious person coming out of Brooklyn, New York, and she's worked in Georgia and she's worked in North Carolina. So Tracy's got it going on. So George, I don't know what happened to the screen here, but something weird just happened. George.
Email this. Can you see it?
George,
yeah.
We need to scroll down. Yeah, George.
I'll send
George,
it out.
I was hoping, dear sister, that you could scroll down to the action items on the resolution so we could read them out loud so that Robin and everybody can know what all the sections were called to do and what the International Secretariat said that they would do. So all of the sections. No, that's what the International Secretariat, could you scroll back up to what the sections were called to do?
Yes, this is
calls
it.
On all sections.
There you go.
And groups. The 33rd International Wilf Congress welcomes the UN General Assembly's initiative for the International Decade for People of African Descent. The Congress 2022 Congress Wilf calls on all sections and groups to support the initiative by disseminating the draft program of action produced by the working group of experts on people of African descent. That would be done by the U.S. Section National Board. And George, I think it falls under your purview as program committee chair. The second thing, publicizing the welcoming of the proclamation of the International Decade for People of African Descent on Wilf sections and groups websites until its end in December 2024. So we need to check to see if that's prominently displayed at the Wilf US section website. This is what's supposed to be done. I'm not on the national board. I can't do it. So George, Joan, Philip, this is what the sections were called to do, mandating the workforce on anti-racism to embed the framework of the draft program of action by the working group of experts on people of African descent in their action plan. Now that at the international level, there is an anti-racism work group. So working proactively to promote respect, protection, and fulfillment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. So the sections were called on to do a great deal of work. And that has to come through actions of the national board. So let's flip down to what the International Secretary said they would do for us. So the International Secretary stopped The international secretary said they would support the will sections in using relevant spaces available to advocate to strengthen national, regional, and international legal frameworks, including the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which the U.S. government has said that it will never participate in because of the call for freedom for the Palestinians. But at any rate, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So I can see very well why the UN would say to extend the decade. And we're all supposed to report to the next Congress in 2025 on what we did. Recognition, justice, and development. And I could say inside of the U.S. section, some of the things that have gone on since Congress have been scandalous. But nevertheless, we will report at the next Congress on what has been done inside of the U.S. section. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay, this goes back to several discussions of the last few minutes. And for example, Alan, and I'm wondering about other branches, whether your town has a REIB committee, Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee, because that's what we have in Burlington. And I was reading somewhere that after George Floyd's death, that many groups started something similar to this, but that there's been a pushback against it. In fact, one of them is in Minneapolis, and that will be interesting when we have the Congress up there this May, right? Because the woman there had been here. Her name is Taisha Green, and she left here and went there and has been fired in Minneapolis. So I'm just saying that there is like a lot going on in terms of dealing with racial justice issues in some of our cities.
Oh, it is so important for us to stay focused. This is the UN Decade Reparations Subcommittee. It is not dealing with overall racial justice. It is dealing with the UN Decade and the fight for reparations. And granted, this is a racial justice issue. But what we're trying to do here is actually advance the cause of reparations and that demand. And it's based on the work that was directed to us from the resolution that we just read from. So we're at the end of our meeting. So the agenda item on when will we meet again, and the proposal is that we would meet on the first Thursday of each month at 2 p.m., which this is the first Thursday. And since we're all here, I think this may be a possibility, which would mean that our next meeting would be within the first few days of October. And so let's hear what say you all, thumbs up or thumbs down. I need to see that because we're trying to schedule the next meeting, which would mean the next meeting would be Thursday, October 5th. And there'll be a lot going on between now and then. I'll be visiting Tracy in North Carolina at the end of this month. And there's some people in Charlotte, Tracy, that are working on reparations. And Samantha Turner knows about that. So we can meet up, hopefully, with Samantha Turner and a few other Will folks when I'm there in Charlotte. So it's
I'm driving, so I had to just unmute and talk. So I am in class on Thursdays. I get out at 2 o'clock, but I'll take 5 minutes away from class and I will attend just like today.
well, thank you. We really appreciate it. So we know if you join a few minutes late, Tracy, we know you're coming. So that sounds great. So any other issues with 2 p.m. on the 5th? I saw a lot of thumbs up. Regina, yes.
Well, actually, I just stumbled, I don't really consider myself a committee member. I just stumbled upon this meeting thinking it was some kind of report or something. So I'm not able to participate on a regular basis. I've got a lot of health issues. That's why I live where I'm living, and I can't take on another committee commitment, but I'm happy to participate today and learn what you're doing. And definitely Philip is on this committee, so I will know what's going on at our monthly San Francisco branch.
Well,
meeting.
Regina, you're a pretty famous Wilfer, and we're honored that you were here. And anytime you want to drop in, please do, because you added significant information to this.
And I
So
sent you some email.
anytime you could drop in would be great. You're famous.
Well,
So
thank
just
you.
drop in.
That I don't think I'm famous, and Joan is a good resource for California stuff. But I am, you know, our local branch really is not really very active. We do meet and discuss things, but I must say that we're not, you know, really producing a lot of work. Sandy does her beyond recruiting work, and we occasionally take on some issues, but we're a very small group now with people. I think I'm the youngest one. I'm 76. Everybody else is, maybe Betty's about my age, but no, she's older. Everybody else is close to 90. So we are not, I don't know if that's true of other branches, but I think that's.
It is totally true of other branches.
Yeah.
I turned 75 in June, and I'm a young 75. I'm a young 75.
I'm
but
unfortunately an old 76, unfortunately. With my, I just had a health crisis this week, so I'm going to sign off now and take a little bit of a nap.
Well, I'm taking a nap when I sign off too.
I appreciate
Very
Regina,
good care, Regina.
We love you so much, Regina. You're famous. Thank you. Thank you. So glad you came. Important information. So our next meeting is the 5th of October, Thursday at 2 p.m. Any last words from anyone before we sign off?
Can't wait to see you guys on the 21st.
Well, actually, I sent you an email about that. We're going to switch to the following week because George is out of town on the 21st of this month. So we're going to change the plan. I'm not coming on the 21st. I'm coming the following week. But let's talk about that later. Oh, this is a side conversation about me coming to North Carolina. So thanks everyone for coming. George, save the recording, save the chat. And thank you so much, Madam Program Committee Chair, for doing a great job with the committees that you're in charge of. So thank you. There's some good stuff in the chat. So we want to make sure that that goes out to everyone along with the recording.
Okay, bye.